All right, we're on. I'm going to call the Council Infrastructure Committee meeting to order. And tonight we have a few items to talk about. The first one is Newport Way 900 to 54th, excuse me. It's going to be presented by Brianne Ross, and we'll talk about that. It's an informational item on where we are with that and what the future is looking like a little bit from now. So start right ahead.
All right, thanks. So my name's Brianne Ross. I'm Senior Transportation Engineer for Public Works Engineering. And I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. We did, there's a slightly modified presentation. After some internal review, there's no substantial changes, but we did reword a couple things to help improve clarity. So just throw that out there.
Is that different from the package? Is that what you're saying? A couple of things?
One, yes.
In the printed one?
But the online one, it looks like they updated it.
The online is updated.
Updated, okay. So
Yes.
the folks know that are looking at it. Great.
Yes, online
Thank you.
version's updated. So I'm here tonight to talk about project definition and give a little bit of an update, and also talk about our neighborhood engagement process. All right. So the purpose of our project is to change the character of the roadway on Newport, making it more conducive to the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, adding improvements in the gaps that the developers have already done, and do some non-motorized improvements, as well as improve neighborhood access to the corridor. Currently, Newport is a minor arterial, has a single 10-foot travel lane in each direction with a bike lane, as well as the continuous 10-foot shared use facility on the north side of the road. It's generally free flow with two-way stop-controlled intersections with the stop signs on the minor streets. And overall, the character of the roadway tends to lend itself to the higher vehicle speeds. So in 2009, pedestrian lighting was added and the pathway that was delineated by the extruded curb. And that was kind of the first step on Newport. And then in 2012, the Central Issaquah plan was adopted, and that established this corridor as a parkway. Then, as development occurred on the parkway vision was incorporated the multi-use path to accommodate the Mountains to Sound regional trail. So in 2015, we had the pedestrian crossing study, and they looked at this corridor in depth. They reaffirmed the parkway standard with the multi-use path and recommended roundabouts as intersection control throughout the corridor, and also identified the need to further analyze intersection control and access on the corridor. So
I have a question as we go in there. On the line where you said pedestrian crossing study reaffirmed the parkway with multi-use path vision. What does that mean that is reaffirmed?
So the TSI did the pedestrian crossing study, and at that time, we had some developments that we were under review, and we had established the parkway with the Central Issaquah plan, and then with those developments also looked at incorporating the multi-use trail. And so they confirmed that that was the best solution for this roadway and the best cross-section. Mm-hmm. And this is the vision that's being applied to Newport from SR 900 54th. It's got the travel lanes, a median and turn pockets, the bike lanes, the landscape buffers, and the multi-use trail on one side and the sidewalk on the other. So, great thing about having some developments come on here is that they are doing some frontage improvements, which you can see shown in greenish blue. And so this project will look at filling the gaps in between those frontage improvements. And then also, we have a lot of driveways and access points on Newport. And so this project also will look at analyzing the existing intersections and driveway access points on the corridor and look at a variety of intersection control options for each of those. So as always, we have to take into account many things when we look at corridor and planning and traffic analysis, emergency access. We, in this case, are integrating the developer plans And then there's a lot of environmental aspects to this project with the stream crossings, wetlands, steep slopes, etc. So this year, our deliverables are going to be, by the end of the year, we'll have a corridor concept, a cost estimate, and hopefully some grant applications in the works. So in May, we already were out there doing traffic counts and traffic analysis and gathering wetland data and critical area data and reviewing the developer frontage plans. And then upcoming, you can see the traffic analysis is continuing, and we're starting our neighborhood engagement in June. And then following that, we'll start preliminary design, and then of course the grants.
Question about the grants. What kind of grants would this project be eligible for?
So it's eligible for potentially TIB grants, potentially PSRC grants. TIB has just released, they start their workshop every year. We're going to go see if they've changed anything from last year. So every year we have to kind of see how potential grant programs may have changed year to year, see if this would still apply. And so as that comes up, we're going to identify all the grants possible that we think we could be successful on.
And then the project that we had in the bond package was, I think, $24 million. Was that if we did the whole thing without developer improvements, or was that just going to be our share?
That was assuming that some developer improvements would probably be in.
Okay, so it's still a pretty expensive project.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
One more while I'm there. So the grants usually come because the road has some sort of regional significance, right? So it's not so this road is one of our regional roads essentially, right? And that's why it would be as the other piece of Newport that we have gotten a grant for, right? So there'd be so it's considered a region, it's our road, but it has regional significance, and that's why it would be able to get funding in these grants, basically. Right?
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, it would be potentially why we could qualify for.
Right, qualify for it versus more of our minor roads would not get that. Right.
So in lowering the speed limit, Sheldon, like we did, does that impact our ability to get grants?
The speed limit on the road is not a criteria in grants that have historically been, sought after. Doesn't mean they don't change the criteria, but right now, I'm not aware of speed limit being a factor.
All right. So this would be potential schedule going forward. This is above and beyond our current project scope and funding level, and the schedule that is shown is contingent upon receiving the full funding necessary for potential right-of-way acquisition as well as construction. If we were to break this out into different phases, that would of course extend our timeline. So this project's kind of unique in that starting here on day one of our project, we are actually on all three categories of the spectrum with our neighborhood engagement. We are going to be collaborating with the community on access needs. We're going to be consulting with the community on the pedestrian crossings, but we will also be informing the community with the parkway concept as well as the developer improvements. So we have a robust neighborhood engagement process, which is going to involve a two-part series workshop. It'll be Wednesday evening on June 7th and June 14th. And this is the opportunity for those residents who really want to dive into the weeds of the corridor and invest some time into it. And so ideally, we're going to have at least one person from each neighborhood who can act as an ambassador for their neighborhood coming towards this workshop, but also an ambassador for the project and returning back to their community and discussing it with them. So during that first night, our goal is for the attendees to be able to provide meaningful input on the corridor. We're going to spend some time educating the residents on our design considerations, including the different intersection control options and their pros and cons. Also dive into the traffic data and traffic analysis, discuss the critical areas and steep slopes and emergency access, And then we'll break out into small groups, and as a group, they can come up with their preferred corridor concept. And in theory, they're holding themselves to those same design considerations that we have to hold ourselves to. So, and then each group will present their concepts. And then the week in between those two workshops, we'll go back and take some of their input and come up with a concept, and come back on the second night, the second week, and our goal would be to incorporate the input that we received in part 1 into corridor concept. We discuss the pros and cons and feasibility of the input that we received that first time, and then present the draft concept or concepts depending on what we have and what comes out of that first workshop. So following our workshops, we will spend some time digesting the input we receive and further analyzing the concept in the corridor. And then we'll be going back to the neighborhoods and the HOAs and sharing all the great work we did in our workshop, and discuss the corridor concept that we have at that point. And then also focus on their specific access point, their driveways, their access on that level with the neighborhoods and the HOAs. So after the corridor concept's developed, we move into the inform stage of our triangle. The affected property owners may slightly influence design as we meet with them one-on-one to potentially discuss right-of-way or easement requirements and property restoration. And then we would continue to update the community regarding the project schedule during design and construction impacts as we move forward.
Pull up the figure that shows. Could you pull up the figure that shows where the projects are and who's building which pieces? Thanks. I had 2 questions. The first one was, actually the one that's earlier, just because it doesn't have all the intersections on it. So the first question was, if the developers are doing their work before we've finished this concept design, how do they know what to build? How do they know what to build, where to build it, how to connect the pieces?
So we have gone through and we have looked at this and applied the Parkway section with the multi-use trail to their frontage improvements. And so that's what they are going forward and building.
Okay, so the second question had to do with phasing. So the bluey-green part is new development roadway improvements. Did the city consider, starting with the project from the west, the first 3 projects there are 2 sections in between the projects that are much smaller. Did the city consider working with the developers to use the same contractors they're using to finish those pieces at the same time so that we would have a continuous section through there rather than wait until we do 1, 2, 3, 4 sections on our own?
I'll answer that. We didn't have the budget to do that. So while that would have been nice, we don't have the funds to do that. To partly maybe answer that question, and I think you mentioned this, Brianne, there are opportunities to phase this. So while the bond was a hopeful attempt to try to do it in one fell swoop and get it done so we don't have those same sort of disruptions to the neighborhood and starts and stops, and to quickly ensure that consistency for all users of the roadway, we weren't successful. So
But we could still phase it.
we could still phase it,
Okay.
and we could discuss which portions we would put in, say, the first phase, and that might be a candidate.
And then it looks like the road, 50% of the road is being built by the new developments. Does that mean the actual cost of doing this road from 54th to 900 is really more around $50 million?
What the graphic shows is it shows the areas in which the developers are doing their frontage improvements. They're only required to do half-street improvements.
street, right.
So when you look at that, that's not an equal thing. So the answer to the question is no. It's
So we
not
get
50.
Curb and gutter on one side and we get ditch
Yeah,
on the
they're
other?
doing one side, and then we're going to have to come along and do the other half. So it's a process to get to the end.
I've got a question on, all the pieces are just in front of the development except for the one long piece there. Are they gonna Do all that in there?
Yeah, so the property line is actually, Bergsma's property line goes up towards Riva's property line, one being on the north end, one being on the south end. So while their driveway for Bergsma is only that small section, their actual property lines are much longer.
And so they're required to do the whole frontage, even though there's.
Yes.
Correct. So Bergsma is doing basically up to where Riva starts, roughly.
More questions?
Something that talked about a little bit before the meeting, and that is that we are referring most of the time to a central Issaquah standard on parkways. And I think one of the big questions that I've been hearing from residents is that standard says limited pedestrian use. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit?
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. So you're absolutely right. There's, in our Central Issaquah plan, we have a section H entitled Parkways, and it has some, I would say, some general guidelines about what a parkway is and how it should function, and there's a cross-section there of what it should look like. So there's a lot of, as we're looking at this, and as council's looking at it as well, there's a lot of terms in here and sort of high-level terms about traffic volumes and speeds and pedestrian use. And I think what we would say is this standard, this parkway standard, is the starting point for what the work we're doing. And it clearly needs, we need to better understand and better define what these terms mean, and that is really a big part of the work that Brianne's talking about doing, and that's why we're excited to have the community in that conversation as well, so that we're all on the same page, and we're in fact getting a street design that supports the adjacent land use and supports the values and the goals and the direction that are important to the community. So you're right, to take just the language here probably isn't specific enough to really clearly give us all the answers that we need to get to construction of the parkway. So that's why we're doing the work that we're doing.
If I were a resident, I could ignore the part that says limited pedestrian, because one of our project goals is to make this pedestrian friendly?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one of the major project goals.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, in spite of the language there, I think that, if you look at the section here that Brianne has on the board, there's not only is there a standard sidewalk on the one side of the street, but there's an expanded sidewalk multi-use trail on the other. So clearly the intent, I agree with you, the language is a little confusing, but I think the cross-section is more, does a better job of illustrating how the corridor would function and the importance that we're placing on pedestrians on that corridor. We've got, 16 feet of pedestrian facilities down that corridor.
That's okay. So it's built in pieces. Developers do some. They do some on one side. How in that process, if it's going to take 2 or 3 years for us to do our piece, maybe 2019, how do you guarantee the safety of people who currently live in the neighborhood and use the sidewalk or use the multipurpose trail? Do we put in interim crosswalks? Do we have interim pedestrian refuges? Like, how do we do it when we do it in pieces like that and still make it safe and usable?
Well, we currently have pedestrian crossings that are safe and usable along that corridor. And as developers do their intersection improvements and the like, we incorporate additional crossings in there. As well as when intersection improvements are done, we're implementing some of the recommendations of the crossing study to implement some roundabouts and things like that, which enhance the traffic calming aspect of the corridor and begin to slow it down. So we're doing everything we can, excuse me, along the way to ensure that the character is morphing the way we want it, and it still stays as a safe place for pedestrians and bicyclists in the meantime.
Yeah. So Central Issaquah plan has a 1,200-foot limit in it that says the blocks will be no longer than that. So would a existing resident expect to see crosswalks every 1,200 feet? Is that way too down in the weeds?
So, yeah, at this
I'm just
point.
trying to figure out if I was
yeah.
a resident, what does this mean to me?
Yeah, at this point, that is a little into the finer details.
Okay.
As Brianne described, one of our goals for the public engagement is to talk about where do people cross,
Yeah.
where might they like to cross in the future, what do they want those crossings to look like. So I think as soon as we've collected that information, we'd be better able to answer your question.
Great, thanks.
I have no questions.
So I just have one thought in particular. Since this is kind of from Central Issaquah, which is a little older plan, and we're looking at this road, mentioned it before, as being part of the Mountain Sound Greenway bicycle path. And we now really are focusing toward Vision Zero and having separated bicycle paths versus, or protected and separated versus just a white line on the road. So I'm wondering if that concept would be part of that, that would be brought into line versus, because as you narrow the lane and you have a bike lane, what you really do is have cars that drive in the bike lane a lot, so they get actually less protected. So I'm just looking to make sure as we look at the pedestrian trails, we look at protecting the bicycles as much as possible.
So on this, it's a shared use path. So we have, generally bicyclists fall into different categories. So you could have a commuter bicyclist that really doesn't want to deal with potential pedestrians, slower bike riders, families. They want to go, probably, since it's 30 miles an hour, the speed of the car. And so they would be on the bike lane generally. And then this multi-use path is capturing use for all ages and allowing bicyclists as well as pedestrians on that path. And that way we can have potentially families riding on the path. They are separated, as well as the pedestrians or other adult bike riders that feel less comfortable on the road.
So I'm looking at the regular bike lanes, the 5-foot bike lanes being protected from vehicles as another thing. As we advance our Vision Zero and our how we protect our bicycles, this is kind of never was thought of, I think, in this original plan. So I'm just bringing that up as a way of
Yeah,
protecting bike lanes.
as we go along the public engagement process and things like that, as we hear comments like you just gave, those are considerations as we look at the cross-section, that we would evaluate the opportunities to do things like that if it's desired, by the majority.
Other questions?
No, thanks.
You have one now?
Just one comment. Are we going
Go
to
ahead.
take comments?
Yeah, we will.
Okay, I'll wait.
All right. And then another thing, just to reiterate what you said earlier about the workshops, there's 2 of them, and you're encouraging people to attend both of them, because they're kind of one that is going to continue into the second one, so you're kind of getting a piece of information, working that up a little bit, and the second one's going to continue to refine that. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that people understand that we really want you to go to both of those.
Absolutely,
Not
yes.
come to the second one, you will have missed only, and you will miss that if you can. Now, some people may not be able to attend both, but if they can, that's our encouragement, so they get part of the whole process.
Right.
All right, okay. All right, are we ready for a public comment, I think?
Sure.
All right, open for a public comment on Newport Way. Yes, please, so anyone on TV can hear you?
Good evening. My name is Hart Sugarman, and I'm a resident of.
It was on, it just went off.
Okay. I'm Hart Sugarman, and I'm a resident of Issaquah for 21 years. And I live at the community called Summerhill, which is at Newport Way and Oak Crest Drive. So that's been my home, and I'm very fond of that area. And I'm considering myself a safety advocate. Just to be aware that in this area we have a trailhead that goes up to Cougar Mountain, and there are also plans to put in a parking area at that area, so we have to be mindful of that. The total width of this, if you add up all these measurements here, it comes out to about 66 feet to 70 feet if you add up all those statistics there. So that's a pretty wide swath of coverage. And there's some homes that will be affected by that as far as their frontage or areas. And then there's also those steep slopes to keep in mind. Getting out of our neighborhoods today is very, very difficult at peak times. If we add up all the homes in Summerhill, Spyglass Hill, Sammamish Point, Bentley House, and Pinecone, adding up all those neighborhood homes, it's 372. if we look at the planned, those purple identified projects of Gateway, the senior housing, Bergsma and Riva, adding up all those dwellings, that's 660. So you're going to go from 372 to 660. You're going to put in the development before the road improvements. I'm not quite sure if that makes sense if you consider how many people are going to be affected by the construction and the detours or whatever occurs in that area. I think the infrastructure and the roadway should be built first before the actual occupants move into their new homes. It's something to keep in mind. The traffic that travels along Newport Way in the morning rush hour, a lot of it is coming off of State Road 900. Instead of going to I-90, they're taking Newport Way as a shortcut to get over to exit 13, and it does save them time. So I think whatever we do as far as road improvements, we also have to put some way of stopping them or slowing them down to make it not worthwhile for them to come on Newport Way. I don't think we can restrict them with a no left turn sign onto Newport Way, but if you put stop signs at every intersection along Newport Way, it becomes a deterrent because the local people have no problem with stopping because they're going short distances. It's the throughput that we're trying to really prevent from traveling there. In this evening's comments, Sheldon, you mentioned roundabouts. I'm just curious how many roundabouts are planned for the stretch of Newport Way from State Road 900 to Southeast 54th?
Currently, there's one at the
Okay.
intersection where Gateway is.
Correct.
The crossing study recommended more.
Right.
And that's part of this process
Okay.
of public engagement, is to have those conversations to deal with the access and things like that
Right.
with properties, as well as slowing the
Right.
traffic down.
But the true feasibility of putting in a roundabout that requires a certain swath of land, I think we should keep it to singular instead of plural until we have confirmation of that. But I thank you all for your involvement in this. I think, Brianne, this community engagement and these workshops are very helpful, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Geraldine Carey, and I live at 955 17th Avenue, Northwest Issaquah. I also have a small piece of property. The address is 1705 Newport Way, and it's real close to the intersection of SR 900 and Newport Way. My question is, I noticed you've got 3 nice little yellow dots where the single-family residences are close to the intersection, and I appreciate your acknowledging us in your consideration for traffic. What I'd like to know is if you're going to take between 66 and 70 feet of land for widening this into a boulevard, what happens to places like Legacy? I mean, that's a vital business on that road, and if you're going to take out all of his yard to make a road for people who need to get from here to Seattle, I mean, it just seems like it's criminal to destroy a commercial property. And I also, on the little piece of property that my family owns, who pays for the improvement on that short section that you have marked with 3 single-family residences? I'd like to know, I mean, is it going to be the families who access that road, or is it going to be the city or some of the projects? We only have, probably Legacy uses it, the Careys use it, and the Engelbricks use it. So there are, 5 cars that use it, and my daughter and son-in-law are living with us, so, there's more, and we have company, so, if you're going to tax us for that improvement, it seems criminal, and I'd like you to address that, because it doesn't seem like we, who have lived there for 40 years, should be responsible for making improvements for everybody who's coming and going in our neighborhood. And I would like to know just how wide is the road right now? Is it 30 feet? Is that pavement to pavement? And are you going to redo the culvert on Newport Way, the new, on Tibbetts Creek? Is that going to be widened another 30 feet? Thank you.
Thank you. You know the general right-of-way width there? We can get that, and then
My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive. I've also been a resident of this Newport Way area for over 30 years, and I originally did do my due diligence when I moved in, and back then we were promised sidewalks on both sides of the street and improvements. And every year in the TIP project, it did show up there. As far as history also, in '07 to '09 is when someone at the city decided to put the multimodal trail in without any sort of public engagement. And what that forced us to do is they shifted the road to the south. Up until that time, most of us were walking safely in that we were coming in, towards town on the north side, and when we went back, we walked on the south side. So we were seeing where traffic was going. But at some point in time, the decision was made to put a multimodal trail on the north side, like I say, without public engagement. Most of the housing is on the south side. So what that caused us to have to do, since you took up all of our walking space on the south side, is we had to cross the street. And that's one of the reasons why, since then, up before then, we still had complaints about the crosswalks. But ever since then, the city has gotten repeated calls from numerous people about the curves, the crosswalks, and the traffic are not safe. And I appreciate what Sheldon said. He may think them safe, but I haven't seen any traffic studies that really show us that. There are true traffic studies. That being said, I would like to see this part of this corridor study be the entire corridor, because we still have the homes which Hart didn't count pass us South 54th. And we're looking at this as a parkway, we should be looking at it in total. And those people out there need something now, and they need it on the south side, because they're using and having to cross to the north to get walking. And we have no Metro bus, nor is there any plan in the near future to have any Metro bus systems on our side. All the Metro buses go on the north side, so we have to walk. We have to cross the street. You forced us into that situation. And so I appreciate, hopefully in these meetings, we can get some of those more concerns, but I think you need to take a step back, look at the history, say, why was it put on the north side? Let's look at putting it on the south side, where the predominant people live, where we don't have parks. Those people living on the north side with the new ones with the gateway and all, they're going to have a community center. They're going to have a pathway to get to downtown, that they don't have to even come to Newport Way. We're still going to have to depend on Newport Way, and those out to the west of us who are still citizens and taxpayers are going to have that problem, or have that situation. So I would like that to be considered as part of that. Also, I heard the traffic counts. My concern is, since the signs have been up and those traffic counts were done when the utilities works were going on last week on a daily basis, and we still have trucks going in and out of Gateway, and Gateway Senior stopped last week also. So started all those. So those traffic counts, as far as through traffic, are not at all accurate or current. And those traffic studies should have been done, last year and even before the time when the Gateway projects, because as more and more Gateway trucks, there are traffic that is deciding not to use us. So their traffic studies are not accurate. They may be accurate for turning in and out of our local neighborhoods, but as far as through traffic, there is no way they are showing what is current today or was before the construction, or what will be after the construction, when and if that ever finishes. The other thing with the Mountains of Sound Greenway, you talk about grants, and I've sent several times to City Council and other key people. There's a lot of opportunities to improve this road if you really look at it and embrace it as the Mountains of Sound Greenway, and getting grants with the byway grants and other things there. So there's other grants to be had, but I would hope you'd do it with embracing what we want and ask us. And just, we out there have no faith in the city, as far as, especially for construction. It has been horrendous with Gateway, and the only way we've gotten safety there is repeated letters and emails to the city to get the situation addressed. We still have parts of the multimodal trail that are underwater all the time. And when it's drained, then we have mud on it. With the utility work that's going on with Anti-Aircraft Creek, and that wasn't mentioned here, where this summer they're now talking about diverting the road, that is not working right now. It is very dangerous with construction. I've had to call several times to get people out there to work with the construction. They've left holes in the sidewalk. Even tonight, which I would like to ask, is there an extended work permit? They were working tonight when I came down from my driveway, or from the entrance, and one of the vehicles was picking up a steel plate to put it back over, and it tipped over. So number one, should they be working at this time of night? And I would say you need to check the safety of your crews that is picking up a heavy steel plate and swinging it around, and it causes the vehicle to tip over. Luckily, the arm was sturdy enough that although the tracks were up in the air, the guy did not fly off of it, but he slowly extended it and it came down to the ground. But that's what I witnessed tonight coming here. I've walked along that road the past couple of days, and the caution signs are placed in the bicycle lanes, which it does say you have to merge, bicycles have to merge, but all the trucks and vehicles coming through there are hitting and clipping the caution signs. And after a year of talking about Gateway and other safety issues here, we're still not safe. And we're not providing any safe way for the bicycles on that route. We're not providing any safe way for anybody that has to get through there on foot. And we have a lot of people from our development and others that have to go into the park and ride. That's how they get to work. And they walk to work. We also have someone that lives out in Lakemont Orchard that has his mobile wheelchair that has to use that pathway to get into Issaquah when he can't get a bus from the other side. He has to cross Newport Way in his wheelchair, go over to the 271 bus to come into Issaquah. If that's not available, he has to come into Issaquah on the multimodal safe path. So in this next week, I appreciate the opportunity, but I really am concerned about the city's ability to implement. And the other thing I guess I'm really concerned about is the amount of money that we're appropriating to parks and other projects out of the general fund. I hear we've got extra money. Why aren't we taking that money that we're making extra, putting it into a fund that's reserved for traffic or for road improvements and sidewalks? Well, I mean, I love parks, but where is our priority in this city? It should be for safety and sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. No one else? Okay. Paul, you had some
Yeah,
thoughts?
just one small comment. This roadway represents something we have multiple examples of in town where it's a neighborhood street, and yet it serves as a pass-through corridor as well. And I think what's evolving here is what needs to be evolving in that when there's truthfully two different uses, we're going to move in the direction where we prioritize the use that's appropriate for the people living there now. So with the scope of what we've done, and I love the conversation about a parkway, at least that's there right now in the Central Issaquah standards, and recognizing that doesn't meet that criteria, right? It doesn't meet the criteria that we actually design and go forward with changes and improvements that favor the neighborhood type use as opposed to the pass-through corridor. I think that's a nice way for us to be moving.
A couple of follow-up questions since
please.
public. Okay, so I was wondering, Sheldon, Gerald and Carrie asked a few questions about how wide the road is now and who pays for the improvement in front of those other properties that are there, and also about the culvert. Could you give whatever general information you have, because I know you may have to go and answer those a different way.
I don't have any specific answers for the questions. The right-of-way, I mean, that's going to be part of the information that staff is going to be providing at the time of the workshops. And so we are pulling that information together. That's part of it. As far as lengthening the culvert at Tibbetts Creek, or that has to all be evaluated to see what's being done on the road and what's needed there. And then the other question about the funding aspect of it, whether property owners would be required to build their frontage on their own. This is a city capital project. I'm not aware of any considerations for local improvement districts or things like that associated with funding this project.
And Art Sugarman's questions, is it fair to say, or is it possible to say when we're doing the public open houses that the design concepts are meant to specifically slow down traffic? Is that what we're doing here? We're slowing down traffic, we're making different access movements safer, and we're allowing for more pedestrian movements? Is that
There's
what
a
we're
number of
aiming
goals
for?
along that corridor, and one of the goals is to manage the speeds and keep the speeds low.
Yeah,
That's one of the major goals.
right. Okay.
We're
so-
looking to change the character of the roadway to help encourage
Right.
people to drive that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Okay, okay.
I mean, another way to say, to add on to that, another way to think about that, sort of back to what Mr. Winterstein mentioned, is we're trying to build a corridor, a parkway, whatever that exactly means, but something, a facility that's consistent with the land use that's out there and that we know is going to be out there. And so we want this roadway, this street, to support both the land use that's developing out there and especially the community that uses this roadway. And we want it to be consistent with the kind of street and roadway that we want for Issaquah, that supports that vision that we're trying to get to. And that's, again, back to, we're starting that process. We have the parkway as the starting point, and then an important piece of this are the workshops that are coming up, so that we understand what, as specifically as we can, what really the goals and the needs and the interests of the neighborhood is for this corridor.
Okay, and then one last question is, so the neighborhoods, we're hoping to get representatives from every HOA or neighborhood, so to speak, and then they have to come for 2 meetings. And they'll talk about their current experience and what they're looking for in the short term. How do we incorporate things into the design that have to do with potential future bus stops and how, for school buses and Metro, how does that get worked into the design as well?
Absolutely. So we will be coordinating, once we have some sort of a concept, coordinating with Metro, as well as the school district to make sure that we accommodate those.
They have what they need.
So like, there's no Metro on that corridor today.
Yeah.
However, we know that that could be a desirable corridor for buses in the
Absolutely.
future.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
All right. And I guess just want to add to the fact that we're in a, to me, this is a city street. It is totally controlled by the city. We have authority to take care of it. That's our purpose as a city street. But it also happens to be one that can connect regionally, which gives us maybe some advantages to get some grants. But our priority is to take care of it as a local city road, to our priorities, is what we want, right? And that's what we're doing. And now this process, to me, this is kind of the first time we're going to do this pilot process from kind of the start, where we're really trying to get folks to come and sort through that. And we're asking them to do some involvement, a couple meetings, not just, show up for an hour and, say what you think and leave. We're really wanting them to spend some time and working on it. So we're asking them to take their time, invest in that. Our commitment in the city is we're going to listen, right? And do that and sort through that. And then, from the first meeting to the second one, really try to lay that out with those questions like some people ask, like how wide is the right of way? It may be, 70 feet in some places, it may go down to 60 in others. And we may have some, it's not may be 100% consistent, right? Because of some of those changes. But we'll have to look at all those things and see what fits and what the priorities are, and knowing that it is going to be designed for our citizens first and foremost. Okay.
I just want to add or underscore one point that Brianne made. While we're really focused on trying to get people to those workshops, both of those workshops, for the reasons that you stated, and we think they're great opportunities for engagement. Those aren't going to be the only ways that we share information or invite comments. And so I want to make sure that while we're emphasizing those two moments, Brianne talked about our approach, and it's already started and will continue going out to HOAs, sending electronic news bulletins and other things. So I just wanted to make sure that people that might be listening that are contemplating spending 2 Wednesday evenings with us and having second thoughts about that, to keep looking for more information and stay engaged, and there'll be other ways to be part of the project.
And this is, like I say, that our citizen involvement process starts heavy at the beginning here, so we're looking at that and then continue to have involvement as we go through the process. And then just again, clarify, we're looking to get this to where we are, this year, but those other dates of out in 18 and 19, we don't know when these things actually start to happen. But we're looking at getting designed so we can know what we want, right? Okay.
One last comment
Go
is
ahead.
I'd really like to see phasing somehow in here. I don't want to see the whole project held hostage till we can find $24 million. If there's pieces that we can do or leverage on development opportunities, where we did it once for a sidewalk connection along Newport Way with Inniswood or whatever that development was. I want to find a way to get this done faster. So there's an opportunity to phase it and work with a developer who's already doing something. I'd really like to pursue that.
Okay. We good with this topic, I think? All right. We will go to item number 2, or B, also with Brianne, talking about 2017 complete streets. Again, informational sharing here.
Yes, so we just wanted to provide an update. Currently, phase 1 of our 2017 Complete Streets is out on ad. Contractors are bidding on it. We will be opening bids on Monday, May 22nd. And we wanted to kind of bring this to you with our current estimated costs. So you can see that for phase 1, which includes the 2nd Avenue and Rainier Trail crossing improvements, Front Street South at the crossing improvement at the 600 block, and then the Sunset crossing out here, and the Northwest Juniper sidewalk. Those are all packaged together, those 4 construction projects. And we will, like I said, be opening bids on Monday. Currently, you can see our budget numbers and where they're at. So it's coming in tight with our estimate. And we look forward to opening bids on Monday. So, any questions or discussion?
Questions?
Actually, the characterization of the mini roundabout on Maple Street as a complete streets project, that sounds, I don't know that that's really material, but that's, I don't recall as characterizing it as a complete streets as you've done in this, in the memo dated from May 11th.
So that original improvement was, if you recall, just the removing of the colored
From the crossing
from
study?
the crossing study.
Yeah,
And
so
so
you're
it
still
was a crossing
characterizing it.
improvement,
Okay.
and so that was, all the crossing improvements were in this
Okay.
as the Complete Streets budget. And then as we supplemented that, this is where its budget stayed.
Okay, that explains it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And so we're hoping that the bids come in so we can do all these, and because they'll be right what we have budgeted. But
Right.
we'll find out.
Right, so if the bids come in within budget, we'll be looking to put this on the consent agenda on June 5th for award. And then if they are over budget, we can be talking further.
We'll be talking, right?
So one thing, just playing scenarios out here. So if it comes in over budget, one of the things that's important for us to be able to get these projects under construction is a lot of the work is along areas where schools are, and it'd be nice to get them completed before the schools start. And so does the committee have a perspective on how much over budget that would cause it to have to come back to committee versus go to regular business, or I should say, would allow it to go regular business and have the discussion in front of council rather than bringing it back to committee? Just as some perspectives in that.
So that's one option. Another option, we're trying to play out scenarios here
Right.
because that will help us be more efficient on our timeline. So that's one option, is if that's maybe the committee's preference, that we come back to you on regular business with a proposal for additional funding. You know, do you have a tolerance level for entertaining that conversation in that way? Or do you have a different threshold for establishing how we might reprioritize the list and eliminate one or more projects? That's another alternative way of handling lack of budget or lack of budgeted funds to complete these.
And we're talking two separate bids, one for Trader Joe's is one bid package and the other one is a separate bid package, so there's two different ones. Are they both being open on the 22nd?
No,
No.
Trader Joe's is not out to bid right now. The only thing that's out to bid is the package of the crossings.
Okay.
They are two separate bid packages.
And Trader Joe's won't go out to bid for
Roughly
another
July.
couple of months or so.
July, okay.
I'll just jump in here too. Another way to say it is, so we're moving into June here. So we have those 4 projects that are going out to bid, and the bids will be open on Monday, and the bids will be whatever they are. And so we would like to be able to move forward and start construction and bring a bid award agenda bill back to council sooner than later. And there's, as Sheldon and Emily are saying, there's a couple of ways to do that. There's, if you feel like you can give us some guidance on what over budget is acceptable or not, maybe that's too hard a question. But secondarily, is there an order to those projects? Because the other thing we could do is do one less project potentially up there and stay within the budget. But we're just, quite honestly, we're concerned about the time of year, and we're finally getting to some good weather here, hopefully, and we really want to get out there and construct not only these 4 projects, but the roundabout that's coming on the heels of this. So that's, I don't know if I'm being totally clear on that, but that's sort of where we're at. And so we want to do something that council can approve and is comfortable with, but we also are trying to move these projects forward.
Okay.
That's a question. Why is this year different than any other year? Why, if we're bidding it in May and we want to do it in June, why do you need to know what our tolerance is? Because I don't remember being asked this before. What's different this year?
Well, I don't know if we were.
So this year we ended up with a little bit of a compressed schedule, design and bidding, because we had ongoing conversations at council about which projects to do,
Okay.
adding that Juniper Street project, further defining the Trader
And
Joe's
that
project.
compressed
And so our design schedule was very compressed. So we're going out to bid a little bit later than we would
Than you
like
normally
to.
would like to.
I'd say
That
we're
makes
maybe
sense.
maybe a month or 2
Yeah, okay.
beyond where we would normally like to be.
And the total dollar amount for the contract's about $1 million? Or is that too high?
So the 4 projects are, it's hard
It
to
doesn't
see
have
up there.
dollars with the four.
Right, the total Complete Streets budget is $1 million.
So you take
For
out
all of
Maple
it.
Street,
About 406.
that's 700,000, you take out traffic calming, we're talking about a $600,000
Correct.
contract. What's our tolerance on that?
Correct. Those 4, it's hard to see, but our budget for the 4 projects, I think it's 591, and
There we go, 591. Okay.
our estimated, yeah, there you go. Thanks, Brianne. There it is. So it's 591, and we're expecting, our current estimate is 595, and we don't know what the bids are. We will know that on Monday.
So I don't think we can answer that question at this point in time, but I think that more than likely, let me know and for sure, and I'd say more than likely we would try to bring it back to the council as quickly as we can. We'll work with you to do things as quick as we can on that. This is something that the council's fully aware of. We've made decisions on that, so I think we can work with you to speed that up as much as possible.
Okay, good. You could comment as well,
Yeah.
Bill? So I actually would say, I have a number in mind. I actually think if it comes in 10% over, I guess my concern is if we wait to get dollar values until June to infrastructure, and then it goes to council in
No.
mid-June, early
No.
July.
Yeah,
it's too-
that's,
Yeah.
That's my suggestion. It'll probably come straight to council.
It will go straight to
Wait,
council.
I think
That would be
come-
June 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah, first June, yeah, so.
June
Okay.
5th.
June
Sorry, the
5th,
5th,
right.
right.
June 5th.
So
Yeah.
that it comes in if
It goes to council.
Right, if
Awesome.
it's $10 over technically, right?
Okay.
So, I'd say, but let me know and we'll talk about probably bringing
But
up.
it is going to council.
I would
That's
say
awesome.
let's bring it to council
Thank
first
you.
as a whole versus coming back to infrastructure. And the only question I have is if it's really over where we talk about maybe deleting one of the items versus, adding, $10,000 or something of that nature. I don't know.
And though it's not shown on this table, I assume the bids will be line item per project.
No,
At least-
no,
okay,
they're
so
not
the-
right now.
So, okay.
Then we
So,
wouldn't.
So
so we're
the-
not going to get, the granularity of the bid isn't going to be at the project level.
So we certainly can dissect that, though.
Okay.
It's just pulling out quantities of which projects are which. We can distill that. Mhm.
Yeah,
So-
I would just echo, once they come in, contact the chair and have a conversation. If it's going to be extremely difficult, that'll be difficult. But if you think something that we can handle committee-like during a regular business meeting on the 5th, then let's try to get it done that way.
Yeah.
But I think
Good.
we're going to have to use some judgment based upon what we've got.
Right. So I'll use that judgment and let you know, and hopefully it should be simple enough that we could do that is, I hope, right?
Great.
And you guys are good with that. Okay. Good
and
enough.
just one
okay.
to Councilmember Polly's comment, our intent is to not be in this situation next year at this time, so we'll want to.
But that makes sense.
So, which sort of leads into the next discussion topic, actually.
Right, and let me just see if there's any public comment on this one.
Jenny Bingham, 375 Southeast Andrews Street. Complete streets. I know I can't ask any questions, but I would assume a complete street is a sidewalk. And therefore, Juniper, we're adding a sidewalk because of all the new buildings that will be going up and people will need to be walking. When is anyone going to listen again and again and again? How many times do I have to bring it up? About a complete street on Southeast Andrews Street for approximately, I believe that's a double wide lot, 100 feet up to 4th Avenue. We've got people now just walking their dogs, letting them poop all over. We got people coming down the road using that side with strollers. Well, you guess what gets in the strollers? We've got the handicap down at the end of Andrews Street, coming down that sidewalk because that is on the side of the street, in wheelchairs or walking, and they're walking through the poop. So is it because, again, just like I said, we live in OLDE town and we don't have the money like the people over on Juniper? And we can take and spend all this money in fancy parks, but you're still not making it safe. A complete street. Do we have to wait for traffic calming? This isn't traffic calming. This is a complete street safety of humans. Not only that 4th Avenue where they're just blowing out from Sunset Way, coming down 4th Place and beating around that corner. No curb and gutter, no nothing, no sidewalk, no nothing. Are we going to wait for a death? You tell me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Brand. We'll go to item C here, Complete Streets Policy, which kind of connects to this, and this says Kurt Seaman's going to lead this.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. And actually, from the last public comment, all this sort of is related, ties together in many ways, I think. And so this is meant to be, and I'm going to look to Emily as well to join in on this one. But just to kick it off, We've talked a lot about the Complete Streets with you over the last few months, and the Complete Streets Ordinance and the Complete Streets Program. We've brought criteria to you. We've talked about what types of projects should be complete streets, and we've thought about this a lot internally in the staff level, and just to sort of, and this is outlined in your memo, and I just want to, so I'm not going to read this to you, but just for others, and just to sort of highlight what the materials we've given you. Sort of historically, we've used Complete Streets money, the program budget, to complete ADA ramps, to make sidewalk repairs, to build small projects, to build crossings, those kinds of things. But as we're looking at the work that we have to do and the amount of dollars it costs just to do some of the things I just mentioned, we're finding that with a limited budget in this program called Complete Streets, there's really only a few things that we can realistically do. And one thing that we wanted to talk to you about is our overlay program. And when we do an overlay program these days, the regulations have changed, and everyone's gotten much more strict about ADA requirements. And so as we do overlays anywhere in the city, we're required to bring all of the adjacent sidewalk ADA ramps to current standards. And so that has historically, in the last few years, been in the ballpark of $150,000 just for our overlay ADA ramp work. So the overlay, I think, is a budget of something less than $1 million, and of that, $150,000 approximately needs to be spent on ADA ramps. And so, so when we look at that, and we look at potentially gaps in sidewalks, small crossing projects, and sidewalk repairs, we could easily have a program here that is in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, which is historically what the Complete Streets program has budgeted. So, so one of the ideas that we wanted to discuss with you, and we're really interested in hearing where you are on this, as to, so there's this other issue of Complete Streets being the correct name for this work or not, but should we have a program that focuses on ADA ramps, sidewalk repairs, crossing improvements, those kinds of sidewalk-related programs, and that's a program called something. Well, we'll just call it sidewalk program, for lack of a better term right now. And so that would be one thing we do. And then all these other projects the smaller projects that we've put into the Complete Streets program would come to you as capital projects, and those would be, we would work with you to rank those and to fund as many of those projects as council wants to fund each year. So it's an idea, it's a way of making things a little bit simpler. So we have this program that focuses on the sidewalk element, and then we have other smaller projects which would be looked at as capital projects. And so that's, I don't know, Emily, do you want to add to that a bit? And
I think you covered most of what I wanted to do, but in a nutshell, we've had some confusion even tonight about the policy versus the budget that have the same term attached to them. And so I think we're looking to differentiate a little bit. That's one objective. And then the second objective is to figure out how to balance or fund our top priorities, given that we have limited number of dollars, and it's all competing for the same pot of money. It all comes from the same basic source. And so we have pavement overlay, where from past presentations, we're not quite funding that at the level we'd like to achieve the pavement condition index rating we would like. So there's something that needs more. Sidewalks, repairs, or filling in gaps, another program or need we've identified that could use more resources. ADA ramps is a new or enhanced obligation of the city and needs a dedicated source of revenue, because we're not going to stop overlaying streets. And then we have these smaller projects that sometimes have been funded out of complete streets, and we're suggesting that, yeah, maybe we don't need a program called Complete Streets. We have a philosophy, we have an ordinance, we have a way of operating that is, thou shalt make a complete street. And that's the guidance that we use every time we go and design a road project. But how do we handle the fact that we have limited budgeted funds and want to address all of these other needs?
Comments or questions?
Yes.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't have any questions, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you give us a little historic perspective on it sounds like that the investments required to bring ramps up to current ADA standards is, I know we did a survey citywide, I never really saw like a final number or kind of what that assessment was, but now you have a program, whether it be due to an overlay or any other type of improvement in the area, there is a new standard we have to bring things up to. So clearly, that's emerged as a bigger, what you're saying, and that's emerged as a larger total of our spend than we've had before. Could you just give me a little historic perspective?
The historic perspective on,
Spend for ADA. I mean, it
Spend
came
for
out of this
ADA.
assessment. I remember being briefed by a woman a couple years ago, and it's like, we're probably in a big deficit, but we were assessing it, and we were going to have an idea of what the overall
Right.
requirements are.
we are in a large deficit when it comes to it. The ADA transition plan has identified numerous locations through town for the need to bring ramps up to standards, sidewalks up to standards. It's a global look at the city's facilities. As far as the ADA ramps, we've typically been incorporating the ADA improvements within our larger capital projects and then in our smaller projects that we do under Complete Streets. And then in the overlay program has had to absorb out of its asphalt money to
Yeah, we got that.
build the concrete.
We already heard that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so that's 150,000 roughly plus or minus just from the overlay. And then the other funding, if I was to put a number to it, I'd probably guess we're probably on the order of $75,000 to $100,000.
Okay, so it wasn't required, ADA didn't have, overlay being now required to actually enhance, if it touches a ramp, to enhance it. That's a new requirement?
If the overlay goes through a crosswalk, it has to update the
Is
ramps.
that new?
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that we're committed to this, we have to do this. It hits us, it lessens what we can achieve with overlay, because we're using it some for ADA. And it also is a significant part of what we're doing in what we call Complete Streets now anyway. And so, I mean, are you asking, should we have a special fund or category for just ADA, or is more, maybe a little bit more broadly, as I think what you suggested in your memo, which was like maintenance and repair and ADA? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, it could be something, I think so one idea for you to consider is I think we're saying it in the memo, is it would be more broadly focused on sidewalks. So that it would be ADA ramp compliance to support the overlay and other opportunities that we have. Certainly sidewalk repair. We've talked a bit about gaps, sidewalk missing gaps. That gets to be a little more complicated because Bree and I were looking at that earlier today, and this is something from a few years ago, but I think it's meant to be the gaps in the sidewalks throughout the city, and it's quite a lengthy list. This list, and it may not be complete, has 200 of them on there. But to answer your question, I think the proposal or the idea would be that we would have, other than this program called Complete Streets, we would have a program focused on sidewalk improvements and repairs and ADA compliance and we could better define what that program would encompass, but that would be the plan, is to have it focused on sidewalks.
And by then exclusion, not on fill in the blank.
And not on, so what's a little, I think, potentially confusing to everyone is not on these other smaller projects that may have sidewalk components, they may have other pieces. So the Maple Roundabout, for example, it's not really a sidewalk improvement. It's not an overlay supporting improvement. That would be a capital project under this scenario. It wouldn't be in this sidewalk program, for example. So that would be maybe an example of a project that we're currently funding out, our complete streets, that wouldn't be funded in this new scenario where.
Sheldon, could you give an example of, I think it was Dogwood, where Complete Streets was used to do something on Dogwood? Dogwood was a capital project, and then
Yes.
Complete Streets supplemented
Dog-
it. And we wouldn't do
Dogwood-
that anymore in this proposal.
Northwest Dogwood Street was a cumulative effect on the Complete Streets program budget funding for a couple of years, where it was held so that it could be added together. And then in 1 year, we basically did the complete street for Northwest Dogwood, a larger type of
Which is already
capital
a capital
project,
project.
which was,
But
yeah,
we use
The
the Complete
bridge
Streets
was.
money too.
right. Pardon?
The bridge was capital.
The
The
roadway.
bridge was separate from Complete Streets. No Complete Streets money was done on the bridge.
Right.
It was all the sidewalk, curb and gutter, and landscaping and street lights that were done on either side of the
And
bridge.
that wouldn't happen under this proposal.
That would not happen under this proposal. What this proposal would do is the program, and I'm going to kind of modify Kurt's title a little bit and maybe call it like non-motorized type of programmatic aspects of using the funding for the ADA ramps that would be required under the overlay, so that the overlay can actually put its money towards the blacktop. Other ADA improvements, possibly even some traffic calming elements, sidewalk repair, maybe filling in some really small gaps of sidewalk, but not the larger gaps of sidewalk, which the program money previously has been used, not just for the other ones, but the smaller capital, which were a little bit larger sidewalk gaps, like the Juniper Gap. Yeah, and so we're proposing those small to moderate sized capital be individual capital projects in the CIP.
Right, Emma?
Just a point of trivia, too, for the evening. This predates me, but my understanding is that before we had a complete streets program with a budget attached to it, we actually had a sidewalk program, and that the sidewalk program went away. The program, the allocated funding called out in that specific way in the budget got changed and became the Complete Streets program. So in essence, what we're saying is we want better clarity again and maybe to revert back to the way it was so that we're investing in that infrastructure. And we have another mechanism to do these other projects. We have the capital budget.
Right.
So I like the pursuit for clarity, but it doesn't feel more clear when you talk about small and medium versus large. That's not clear. To a person who where there's not a sidewalk in front of their house today, whether that's small, medium, or large, doesn't really matter. So I'm not sure that helps. And so you probably had some magnitude in mind. I don't know if it was linear feet or cost, but that's not more clear to me at all. So can I ask it again? So what did we lose when the old sidewalk program got folded into Complete Streets? It sounds like you've identified something now, and we like to kind of bring that back because we've lost something. What is that?
So, and again, it predates me, but my understanding is that that separate allocation that went towards sidewalk repair and filling in sidewalk gaps, et cetera, there was an assumption that the operating budget would take that on and grow, match that magnitude and continue to grow with price escalation over time. And that hasn't really happened. And meanwhile, the Complete Streets program started in its place and took that chunk of the budget and then began to be used for other things other than sidewalk repair and
Like
filling
bike
in
lanes?
gaps. And,
What else?
Bike lanes and these multifaceted, smaller to
dog
medium capital projects.
Okay.
Doug comments.
Okay, all right. So let me say one clarification, we'll go to that. So what I'm trying to sort out here is, to me, I think, I like the title of non-motorized versus sidewalk, because I'd like to, we stay away from the roadway, but we're looking at motorized. Sometimes that may be a bike lane, but it's for non-motorized work. Sounds like what we want to do in that is going to be predominantly sidewalk. And that point of that program of filling in the gaps and maintaining the ones we have that need repair and replacement is what I see as a priority for that funding of construction. Right? That's what I'm seeing, the actual dollars turning into a project on the ground. And then we have a policy that we're talking about, that we're trying to change names here, that we should have a general street policy that we say when we build streets or we maintain or repair streets, these are our goals, and we should have a complete street with that has all the facilities we need on that street. And that'd be our overall policy, and that would apply to new major capital projects such as Newport Way versus also a smaller capital project in front of one little house development that has to put a new sidewalk in, right? So whatever that project is, we have this policy that guides that. And then in addition to that, we have, okay, now we're trying to take care of our sidewalks and non-motorized facilities to maintain and fill in the gaps, because we know we have lots of gaps, as you just showed, about 5 pages worth of gaps, so that we really want to get to, right? And so we want to have a program, and the council has set aside money historically to pay for that, and we want to do that and keep that separate. The one place that I'm not sure what you're saying is, whether that's ADA or whatever, it doesn't matter, but the overlayment program has been, is a separate program, but because of that, the requirements, that's doing some of those complete streets items. As it crosses a crosswalk, it has to maintain or upgrade or whatever. So it's absorbing some of that cost, which means we're getting a little less overlayment on, because we're losing 100 or 150,000 a year of overlayment to crosswalks and ramps and sidewalk improvements that have to be done. Okay? So what we want to do is clarify those things so that we know what they are. And the only question I have is whether, and you're right, it's the same money source, really. So whether it comes out of the overlayment side or the street improvement side, non-motorized side, it really doesn't matter. As long as we put money as a council into that budget, it's going to be dealing with those issues. So how we separate that as we want to run it. So that's what I'm seeing as the question. Does that kind of sound more right? Just trying to bring that to a head? Okay. So if we're okay at this point, we'll take public comment, and then we can discuss this a little more? Okay. All right. Any public comment on this topic? Come on up.
Geraldine Carey. Do I need to give my address again? Okay.
No, that's good.
I want to just ask, how much does it cost when you put in a sidewalk? I mean, how many bags of cement does it take to make one section of sidewalk? You know, what are we talking about when we're talking about, doing a sidewalk for a house, a few houses? Can you address that just so, I feel like I want to donate a bag of cement and go out there and do it, but I know there's probably a liability, but, somebody has to do something, and, if you keep ignoring it, I feel like I would like that done for me, so I would like to do it for somebody, and I'll donate a couple bags of cement if it helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, so-
Can you address that a little bit?
So sure, we can try to
That's a
answer
great
that question.
question. We all need to have a common understanding of this. I think that's a kind of a basis of understanding everybody has to have. That's
So-
what we talk, when we say doing something about a sidewalk, what does that entail?
So
And I
a
know it's not simple.
sidewalk is the materials that are needed to construct the sidewalk. A sidewalk is the design of the sidewalk, especially, so there's more to it than may meet the eye. So especially, just to use ADA ramps for an example, there's very strict requirements on grades in all directions on an ADA ramp that are very tight tolerances. And so and depending on where you're building this and what you're trying to match into, it needs some significant design. So there's the design element to both the sidewalks and ADA ramps. There's the stormwater element is another important component to sidewalk design. I mean, to give you I don't know, Brianna, if you can pull up our budget sheet there, because one way to think about it, and Brianna, you're gonna have to tell me on the one sidewalk project we have there, the length of that project, but that's a sidewalk project.
About Juniper that we're doing.
Do you have the Juniper? There you go. So the Juniper sidewalk, do you want to talk about that project? Because that's a sidewalk project.
Okay, that's a good specific example, but it's not just concrete, right? There, we may have to do curb, we may have to manage stormwater, and I think
Right.
those are the
Survey,
elements that
excavation,
people,
design.
would that contribute to the complexity and the cost
Right,
at the
so,
time?
so exactly.
We
So-
have standards for that.
Yes, and if you look at, I'll let Brianna answer, but if you just briefly walk us through what that project is and approximately what the costs are for that length, it gives you an idea. So it's not, I wish it were that simple, that it was just we could put some concrete in and it would be done. But there's everything that we have in that description. It's typically curb, gutter, sidewalk, paving, drainage, matching existing, doing the design for that. Sometimes there's right-of-way constraints or needs, so it's not trying to exaggerate the difficulty of it, but it's more than just concrete.
Yeah,
Okay,
and-
so,
I'm sorry.
For an example, this was our Juniper Street sidewalk. And so there's a gap between the driveway and 7th. And in theory, all we are doing is installing sidewalk in that gap. However, as has been mentioned, we have to install storm. We have to install curb, gutter, and sidewalk. So previously, the water that was on the roadway just ran into a ditch and infiltrated. But by installing a sidewalk, you have to install curb and gutter, and then therefore capture that stormwater. So you have to have a stormwater conveyance system with a bunch of catch basins and pipes, digging up the ground, repairing it, et cetera. And then you also have to do the connected ADA ramps. So while the scope of the sidewalk really was from that driveway to 7th, you can see the improvements extend much farther beyond that. So,
Oh, no,
Nope.
I was talking.
So that's
You're still answering Paul's
that's actually a pretty, I don't know, I think this is a pretty good example of a small, on paper, a sidewalk project, and as you can see, there's quite a bit more to it than just concrete.
Understood, and so I'll just finish my comment, and so back to what Sheldon said about small, medium, right? I knew about integrating with the existing there, and the ADA ramping and the particulars there. There's design, there's survey, there could be right away. I knew about stormwater, and like you said, maybe having to add conveyance, and so it's really hard to think about a small sidewalk project. I mean, when we have to get into all of that, they're all they're all large to an extent. They've got multiple elements to them. So that's where I'm struggling with this policy consideration, that we could say that some of these are small and some of these are medium and some are large. I don't know if you have something more particular when you say small, medium, or large. That's what I think we need to get clarity on.
Sort of follow-up question on that. So there's a certain linear footage of sidewalk there, although you have those gorgeous pedestrian bump outs that I love. And so if a resident were to ask you if that's 500 square feet or 500 linear feet, what does it cost a square foot or a linear foot? Do you guys have that number just to answer Geraldine's question? It's not just a few bags. Oh, okay, thanks.
And if I remember, because we were in the middle of public comment and we started
we
answering
haven't
questions.
finished. There we go.
So we could come back with a range of costs.
Okay, well, no,
to
that's
give
okay. I
you-
think Bill's right.
Right,
Finish public
yeah,
comment.
but to answer a question, like I say, there may be some simpler ones and more complex,
Yep.
depending upon the situation. Is there any additional public comment? Sorry to interrupt that. We got excited. Sorry.
I know. It's so frustrating to hear complete streets, and it used to be roads, and it used to be this, and it used to be that, and we're going to change the wording to this, and then Bill comes up, we need to make it a code, but nothing gets done. The same things just sit there and don't get done. So now, if you put it back in a different word, then that's a waiting period for that again. Or if you're going to wait and build a code for it, for ADA, then you got to put that off. But in the meantime, Juniper will go because we've got a lot of new homes going in there. Is there not a code at all or a law to have ADA sidewalks on the same side as a group home for handicapped individuals? Kurt, can you answer that?
So, what are we doing here?
Is he allowed to? No?
Well, we're coming, the question is there a state?
Okay, is there a code that says, so we got the group home. I don't know if Kurt's aware, the group home that's on Andrew Street and Second. The people that are handicapped. They have workers walk those people or put them in wheelchairs or whatever, or just regular people walking by. Is there a code that says, especially on that side of the street, where they do not want to walk those handicapped people across Andrews to the south side, they want to keep them on the north side because that's where they leave their group home and walk on the left side? Is there not a code or a law that covers that for the people, or why does this keep not being done?
Answer now, fine, if not, we'll get
Okay, so I can answer you more generally, and I'll let Sheldon jump in here too. Disabilities Act is a federal requirement.
Federal requirement.
And so, and the requirement is that you have, that you construct and you have, so any, as I understand it, the simplest way to say it is anywhere you have people, able-bodied people can walk, you also need to provide facilities for disabled people, whether it's in wheelchairs or elderly or if they have any, if they're challenged in any way with mobility, you're required to provide those facilities as well. And so that's the city's goal. And so, you know, we have a lot of areas throughout the city that don't currently meet those ADA requirements all over the city. And so the challenge here, and what I think what we're talking about is what's the appropriate level of funding and what's the appropriate amount of how much do we want to prioritize on sidewalks and ADA compliance in the city. And so you're right. So in a perfect world, you know, we would bring the entire city up to ADA compliance overnight. We don't live in a perfect world, so we're trying to come up with something that heads us in that direction. So that's not a specific answer to your question,
No.
but the short answer is yes. All sidewalks need to be ADA compliant. I don't know, Sheldon,
And
do
there
you
is
wanna-
no preference in front of elementary schools where there may be children that are disabled. We make sure the sidewalks are complete there, don't we? And we make sure the sidewalks are complete down by Aegis, even though there's nothing on Juniper. Okay, so we're talking the same side of the street of a group home for handicapped adults. And you've beat it, and you've beat it, and you beat it, and you've shoved that back and forth, named it something different, and 47 years later that I've been here, there's no sidewalk there. So can a handicapped person from that home sue the city if they're injured or ran over by the cars that come down Fourth? I don't know. Maybe if you guys think about that, something will get done. And you can think about big or small. Yeah, Juniper's a little bit bigger than the 100 feet on Andrews. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Any other public comments?
Mary Lynch, this is just a quick follow-up. I know it's been talked, but I haven't seen anything as far as follow-up, is putting something on the website where we had a map of where there are gaps in the sidewalk. I think getting that up on the website so it's viewable as soon as possible, getting the citizens' action request or some form in which the citizens can communicate with the city to, address Jenny's issue on identifying what they think is a priority might help on some of this too. But I think we need to make it more public and transparent on where we've identified the gaps, what projects we have going on to fix those, and if you have one in your area, how a citizen can handle that. Getting that on the website, getting your news flashes out, I think would really help get things forward, and this might help set your priorities.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Seeing none? Okay, you had a comment, Mary Lou?
Yeah, some comments. So I like the idea that we are looking at the Complete Streets policy language and the Complete Street budget thing and pulling them apart because they never did match anyway. So that totally makes sense. So I support most of what was written in the memo, Kurt. I think that the Complete Street policy needs to be reworked, but more in a way, it's not absolutely guaranteeing specifically that there's a sidewalk on both sides of the street everywhere. It's making sure that all modes of transportation are accommodated. And for example, the street I used to live on was a cul-de-sac and had no sidewalks, and that worked out fine. Doesn't need sidewalks. So the policy needs to get rewritten. As far as calling it something other than complete streets in the budget, I think that's great. I think a non-motorized small works projects would be a good definition, but that's because I'm an engineer and we use that word and it's probably not a great descriptor. But you can do that by dollar amount or you can do it by scale of the project. So it's projects under a certain size. And I like it being sidewalks and ADA ramps, gaps in the sidewalk, repairs to the sidewalk. I think that's a good way of going. And anything that gets above that ends up being a capital project, and I think that's great. One thing I'm not seeing here, either in the Complete Streets language policy or in our budget, is a piece where we are talking about bicycling. And Bill brought up something tonight where he talked about a bike lane, and we don't seem to do anything other than bike lanes for bikers. We don't seem to do sharrows, we don't seem to do signage or anything. We just sort of talk about the hard bike lane. I think that's a gap in what we do right now. And I would think if we're planning out a bike network, and say, for example, the bike network that we were going to say people would bike off of Sunset and bike in the neighborhoods, we have to do something with that. We have to paint it, we have to sign it, something. And I would think that that might fall under the small works project as well. So I just wanted to call that one out.
Not so much a comment, maybe some questions as well about the proposal. These smaller projects that today we might address under a Complete Streets, which we're saying let's shift. Sheldon, are we talking about projects that would have to go on the TIP?
Yes, we are. And in the CIP.
So does that change anything? I mean, so today we can do a Complete Streets project, and it doesn't have to be on the TIP. And so I don't know that it's an administrative matter. I realize that, but I'm just wondering if that changes anything.
It doesn't change the funding need. The needs are still there. What it does is it highlights the projects individually and provides council with an opportunity to prioritize those amongst all the other priorities it has for funding requests.
You know, we won't do a project unless it's on the TIP. Right? They have to be on the TIP to be eligible for funding, outside funding.
For outside funding, yes.
Right. But as a practice, we don't do transportation, mobility projects that are not on the TIP.
Well, for instance, a couple of years ago, because of the magnitude of the Complete Streets program line item in the budget, it was scaled such that you could do $250,000, $300,000 projects, maybe a couple of them together in each year. And some of the projects that were on the non-motorized impact fee list were of that magnitude or smaller in their estimates. And so instead of having an individual project on the CIP, adding more projects to the list, those were incorporated into the Complete Streets program and are kept on a side list, if you recall the conversation from a couple of years ago, and we track them over there. So we make sure we don't lose track of them. And so it was, as money becomes available in the Complete Streets program, we were going to build those projects. But in this case, those projects would now be brought forward and highlighted as their own individual project, and it would, it just brings it out. It's another sheet, on the capital program as well as the TIP. It's another listed project. All it does is bring it out and highlight it. It doesn't add more to the requirement. The dollars requirements are still there. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, I just know that, it's the administrative thing of getting projects on the TIP. And if that,
Yes.
or we're going to identify something and now delay it because, oh my gosh, it's not on the TIP. Maybe that's an unusual circumstance, but that's what I'm just trying to understand.
If we're going to delay something because it's
So I think with our new process of talking about the CIP and applying the criteria and then having a subsequent conversation to see if the way it's presented in the draft CIP aligns with your priorities, that new process will allow you to pick a project that may not be classically or even listed under the TIP list, but is still a project that you deem worthy and want to get done sooner rather than later.
So, does that answer, or
Actually, it does, and that's kind of what I was looking for. The TIP exists for a reason, and what I just heard is now we have to manage this correctly. Is that through the CIP process, we can really put any project on there, whether it's on the TIP or not. So we still need to maintain we still have to identify what these candidate list of projects are. We have to manage it somehow, whether it's on the TIP or elsewhere for consideration on the CIP. I realize that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but that's the clarity I'm seeking.
And the idea would be that we wouldn't lose any projects that we want to do.
Right.
That's not, the projects aren't disappearing. I think it's trying to be more intentional and clear on this, what we'll call the non-motorized program. And to Emily made a point earlier about sort of the origins of Complete Streets. And I did find something here back in our 2010 TIP, and I don't know if it's the first year that Complete Streets were mentioned, but it's interesting that in this project description, it says it consolidates 3 projects, some kind of a crosswalk project, which I'm not sure which one it is, and then the sidewalk program and addition of enhanced bike lanes. So we're kind of going back to some of that in what we're talking about with you tonight, and we're just trying to be really clear and really intentional on, so this non-motorized program and what it would do. We would look for opportunities to enhance bike lanes or complete bike lanes, all the stuff we talked about with sidewalks, ADA ramps. Those would be, so I think it would be helpful to us and to council to know then when we're talking about this program, those are the types of projects we're looking at. They're all non-motorized, they're all, to your comment about size, maybe we need to do a little more work on that, but they're all non-motorized, they're sidewalks and they're bike lanes. It's really simple in the scope, a little more complex in defining what we would actually build, but that's I think that helps, but our intent is to make this simpler, not more complicated. I don't know if we're moving in that direction or not.
So what I think you want from tonight is from us, because this is discussion, right? And this is to give you a little more direction to work with these definitions we're talking about, to improve them so we have, something that has street policy, something that is a non-motorized program, and how to put them in there. And I think, I'm hearing from everybody, I think, that we're in agreement that we want to do that. We want to get rid of this duplication of Complete Streets named, used on 2 different things. It's confusing. Budget and policy. and let's rename those. It sounds like we're looking at non-motorized program, which is sidewalks and possibly bike lanes, as a program of work on the budget, and then some policy that deals with overall looking at streets and roads as a whole, how we look at them, and write that up a little more cleanly, and then how we budget that. The only thing I'm not sure, I think you asked a question on that I don't think we gave you an answer, is the ADA cost in the overlayment program.
That's right.
So that part, I don't think we've come to consensus. The rest of it, I think we're kind of consensus on what we're doing here, but that piece, I don't think we've come to
Okay, my
consensus on.
comment,
So can we
ADA
have-
in the overlay program belongs in the small projects thing. It does not belong in the overlay program. It shouldn't be part of that. It doesn't do anything to improve the pavement management condition of the road. So I don't think it belongs in the overlay program. It belongs in this program.
Yeah, coming in, I felt the same way. That's what I was trying to get at. If we've identified some backlog of ADA work, then let's identify the backlog of ADA work. Let's put a number to that, and we as a council can decide that, how we're going to allocate funds to address that. And the overlay program can then draw upon that and say, okay, I want to do this overlay, but we don't have to take away from overlay. We have another source to do the ADA components of an overlay program. Yes.
Yep.
That's what I was trying to, I want to carve that piece out and understand what that is and fund that appropriately and know that when we talk about overlay, we're going to get what we want out of overlay, and they have resources to do ADA components when they encounter them.
Okay, so I think now we've answered that question for you, right? All right, I just want to get clear. I think we've got all the questions here where you can now play with this a little bit and bring it back to us at some point where we can then have this kind of written up so it's a little more clear. Are there any other questions you guys have to make sure we're giving you clear direction?
I think we're good. Thank you very much. We just felt like we were headed down a path creating this criteria for the program, and we said,
Right.
I think it's time to stop and talk about budget realities and all the needs. So
So-
thank you.
Great, so you're going to do this, and then the other thing we talked about previously, now I hear about evaluation criteria and all that kind of stuff, we'll deal with that after we
Yeah,
get
I
this
think
sorted.
it changes that whole
Right, that'll change that whole
discussion,
thing. So let's
yes.
get this settled,
Yeah.
and then at some point, we'll come back and revisit that and see what we want to do with that part.
Really good. Thank you.
All right? We good?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, all right. So, we now have one that is our meteor issue tonight, which is AB 7249, discuss the creation of a Transportation Mobility Board. And Emily Moon, you're going to take lead on that. We've discussed, just a little quickly, we've discussed this a couple times. We've looked at it. It's been around for a little while. Council President's kind of pushing me to do something on this quickly, or not let it sit too much longer. And I think at this point, you've put something together, you've listened to us from other times, so you've got a draft here that we can look at and discuss, and maybe add a little more critique to it, and get this wrapped up, hopefully, it's fairly soon, right? So, Emily,
Yes,
you're on.
that's great. Fantastic intro.
Thanks, Brianna.
I am going to just maybe touch on a couple highlights for people that are listening, and then I thought maybe we could just turn to the ordinance and start to talk about what we see there, what we like, what we don't. So the ordinance was drafted with all of your comments in mind, the comments that we have received during public comments and meetings, and then the comments that were received via the survey that we conducted with a few of the city's boards and commissions. And so we kept the purview, I hope, to what at least 2 of 3 of you wanted, which was really at that, a focus on the policy level. And so that's represented a little bit in the whereas clause, the resolution portion of the ordinance. And then I'd say if you turn your attention to the portion called duties and responsibilities, that's where we really talk about the purview for the group. So that's one area that I think we should have some discussion on. Another that we haven't talked about in great deal is the number of members, for example. We did talk about the composition of the board, and there was support for kind of a mix of residents and some subject matter experts. So that's reflected there. So I think those are two of the primary places that we should probably discuss tonight. And I haven't put it on the drive, but maybe you can pull it up on the web agenda. Yeah, so if you just go to Explorer and try to pull it up. So while Sheldon's doing that, is there a preference on how to jump in and talk about the ordinance?
Well, at least, I think, like I say, a lot of this is kind of standard stuff for committee or board or so forth. I think the thing about membership, I think you're right on, who's on it, and the duties and responsibilities are mainly the two things that are
Sure.
of a critical intent. So
Yeah,
I think you can start talking about the membership
Sure.
while he's pulling it up.
And Bill, I failed to mention that we used as the basis, of course, the most recent board and commission ordinances when they were formed.
Yeah, and that's fine. So we're looking at that. And just to comment, it looks like you've given it a name finally that's a little different than whatever, which I'm
I think
fine
we've
with.
used a few different titles, and that's still up for your discussion, but yeah.
So that's
there's
another
one
item of
proposed here.
discussion. So Transportation Advisory Board is what is the current thought.
The acronym worked. It's easy enough.
tab,
Yeah,
old soda.
right.
Diet.
I couldn't think of any bad connotations, so, other than maybe a dislike for the soda pop, right?
Right. So talk about membership a little bit while he's pulling that up, if you would. Start there. Because that's a little different than most of the ones we've looked at. Ordinance.
Yep. I'll pass the memo.
Use page up and page down.
Go past this. Pass it, yeah. Here, next, right in it, right
There you
there,
go.
right
Why don't
there.
you stop there and we can.
Okay, so talk about membership, because I think this is a little unique to most of other boards and commissions. So talk about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it somewhat unique, although I believe Human Services Commission has some language that's similar in that it states some preferences for making sure that there's some subject matter expertise and kind of diversity in the group. So not unheard of in our
Right.
ordinances.
The Development Commission, Emily, also have those requirements for some sort of expertise as well? And non-residency is okay if you bring that expertise to the table?
I believe that's correct. I'd have to
Okay.
double check, but.
It used to be.
And you all here talk about residents or employed in a business residing in Issaquah as well. There's a little more leeway there too.
Didn't have any questions on that.
No questions on the membership?
So the only other point that I'd make here is I certainly entertain debate with the transportation mobility team about the size. So we might want to talk about that. Our boards and commissions vary in size. I landed on 9, I don't know, for a variety of reasons. I wanted to have a healthy component of the resident, potentially non-resident mix. Wanted to make sure that the group had enough membership that you get the quality and diversity of opinion. But there's always issues too with potentially with quorum. And so maybe with having a larger board and having the alternates, which are also suggested here, we have a higher likelihood of achieving a quorum at each meeting.
Yeah, so no questions? I'm okay with this.
I'm okay
part.
with 9.
Yeah, I think in this case, the bigger boards are harder to manage, definitely, as I've been on bigger ones and smaller ones. But in this case, it's varied enough topic. I think the higher number is warranted. I think I'm with you on that thought. Okay, all right. Go on to duties then.
I had some questions on the duties, Emily, but it had more to do with thinking about things that are floating around now that we deal with. So for example, the decision that we should no longer have truck routes through Old Town. Policy decision, that's something these guys would have thrown around and played with. Red light cameras, speed cameras, okay, not actually the locations, but whether or not we're going to use them or have a program.
Sure.
Is something that would float through
I
here.
think that could fall in number 2.
Number
Okay.
2 is broad.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, 2 is broad, 6 is fairly broad too. I think that gives a wide range, those 2 in particular. Other thoughts, anybody, or we're ready to public comment?
Couple other thoughts. So, for example, as a council, we've never sat down and talked about things such as, does council want to have a policy where year over year we reduce the volume of traffic on Front Street? We've never had a conversation like that. With the TAB, is that a place where we ask them to think about scenarios, how we could accomplish that, or where does that policy question get talked about now or with the tab?
I think likewise it could fit into number 2 if there was a request from the minimum required amount of council members to go and study that. And we might need to have more conversation about establishing those protocols for referring items or for listing items officially on the work plan of the advisory board. But it seems like that would fit within this purview.
Okay, and I asked that because with EFR and when they changed their committee structure and went to only one committee, referral for work items had to come from a majority of the board in order for it to make it onto a work plan and go to their one committee that they had. That's not the way we work with a lot of other advisory boards or commissions. We don't usually have that back and forth with them, or kind of the discussion at council where we take a majority opinion to get something on a work plan. We don't normally do that, but it is a model that EFR uses. It's different, so. Okay. Do we need to clarify that in here, or was the language clear enough that it's not like a council member could call up and say, I'd like to add something to the work plan?
Actually, I think it reads rather broadly. Number 1 does say create an annual work plan in consultation with the mayor, city staff, and city council. So that really doesn't.
And leaves it wide open there, doesn't it?
Everybody's got a hand in it, and it doesn't really. So we don't at a council level, we don't approve anybody's work plan
Right.
today. And in fact,
We don't even
and does anybody have a work plan?
Most commissions do.
Yep. Commissions do.
Commissions do, yeah.
And it's not something we help set up. So this
That's right,
this
that's
is
right,
different.
that's right.
This is
So-
a different
so
way of
like-
doing it.
Are you trying to say more on that, Paul?
No, I'm just
Thinking.
yeah, going through the thought exercise of an implementation, what this would be.
That's what I'm thinking of too, and I'm thinking of things that come up, like our last conversation of, people who want sidewalks in their area that don't have them.
Right.
And want speed limits reduced in areas, or traffic calming, and those kinds of things that they
Traffic calming,
want.
that's a good one.
That's, so citizens who want something, would they be able to access, how would they get that information, or would that be coming from us in a work plan for that year? Kind of thing, how would those things come?
I
Looking
think
back
there's
on how
two
we reduced the
questions in
speed limits
that.
on Newport.
Yeah.
Newport.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things have come from various things, so how would they get onto something? I assume, I'd like to see them on here
Excellent
before they get to the
questions.
council.
Yeah, excellent questions. I think 2 questions in there. One is, how do we handle new topics that come up after the work plan has been established, right? And then secondly, what's the ability for a resident or a group of residents to directly approach an advisory board? And most entities I've worked for have had policies around that. So I think it's an excellent thing to talk about. Most organizations, well, it depends on the type of board, but if the work plan is being blessed and established by the council, and the council is desiring to make sure that that group is focused on the things that are a priority to the full city and to the council, then I would suggest that those requests be made of the council, and then the council can have discussion as to what to refer.
I agree. So like we've had this evening, and it happens often in our committee meetings, the public will come up with a very specific, or a group of people will have something very specific that they feel passionately about. And I think that's, I think that should be to the council. I think as the elected representatives, the council, need to respond to that rather than, and then decide, what, there's a policy question here. And we can discuss this, and we can decide if we want the consultation from this tab as part of our decision-making process.
So, just playing that out a little further, so people come to the board meeting and they talk about these things, and the board's hearing them, but you're saying it has to get to us, so the
It
board
does have
could.
to get to
Yeah,
us.
so they could, inform us that that's been an issue that's been coming to them.
Sure.
And they could inform the council that, we're hearing this concern in this neighborhood or this whatever, and then we could consider whether to add that to their work plan or to take it up ourselves or whatever, right? So I'm just looking at something that doesn't drag on so long that something comes up and it's like, oh, it has to, there's a long process of getting around, but we can shorten that as fast as we want to if we saw it was more critical for some reason or another.
Yep.
I certainly think that it's established, come to these committees, talk to the council members, say what you got to say, or call someone up, have a meeting somewhere sometime. And I think, I think that needs to be reinforced. That's still, that shouldn't change at all. And there shouldn't be any confusion about that at all. I think there's a good example here tonight. What we've done in the last few years for Complete Streets was very much, it was definitely, we put a real emphasis on crosswalks. A lot of the Complete Streets work was a result the last few years of the crossing study, and that emerged from the demand of a strong cry from citizens. And then we took legislative action and then gave direction to the administration to, this is what the program's going to be. This is our priority. And so that's, I think, that has to stay. But now there is, it could have been at that time, we could have decided, do we want to, for our crossing study, do we want the input? Is this a matter that we want this board to weigh in on us or not? Then that's putting it on their work plan or not. Say, no, we're going to handle it at this level. That, I wouldn't say that necessarily would prevent or there being a conversation at the board level anyway. I mean, don't want to shut any of that down. But at the same way, it is another touch point. It would be another opportunity, a public gathering, not elected, but appointed representatives with a special area of concern. And it still need to be a forum, where we still listen to the public.
Okay. Any public comments on this issue? Seeing none. Any more comments, Mary Lou?
Okay, so for me, I'm very excited about this. This is a different kind, in my mind, different kind of advisory group than we've ever set up before. Our other commissions don't typically come and present us an annual report of the work plan activities, nor do we participate in setting up their work plans. So I don't want this just to be another advisory group or commission because we want some people to weigh in. We're doing this because what we've been doing over the last 20 years isn't getting us where we want to be with transportation. So this, to me, is a very different kind of group than we've ever set up before. This is supposed to be the brainstorming, the problem solving, and this is not something we've typically asked. So I like the wording, I'm fine with the wording, but I just don't want to make this like a kind of a, this is just an exercise, we're going to put another group together. This group needs to do and talk about really big things, and we need to move on this because we say over and over again, it's our number one issue, and we don't seem to be making ground on it. So I have very high expectations that this helps us to look at piloting some different things, testing out some different things, but we need to make progress. We're just inundated with traffic and congestion right now, so. But I like the wording. I'm fine with all the wording.
Oh,
I do want to talk about number 6 up here, but let's go back to number 2, researching and reviewing transportation-related ordinances and policies for recommendation. Like we discussed, it was back in March when we talked about it at this committee a little bit about, I think that was the last time we got input that helped you formulate, what we have in front of us today. Number 2 is really broad. And the council, it's been a legislative priority to create a master mobility plan for the city. And I see that fits within number 2, for this organization, this group, to be an active participant in helping with researching and reviewing and making recommendations for what is really a policy document, which is the master mobility plan. So that's how I see this fits in here, and I would think that would be a significant item when we get to it.
I also envisioned it as the latter part of number 3.
long-range plan.
So, okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about 6. That is transportation program, services. Yeah, that's pretty broad.
Pretty broad.
What were you intending there?
So we have lovely programs in our Office of Sustainability in particular.
Okay.
And
Like the
they
salmon-friendly trips, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, so they would value having an opportunity to get input from time to time, and again, with limited resources, we need to make sure that we're putting out the level of effort that's desired and in which places, so.
So you're saying that from sustainability, I mean, they contributed, this reflects some of their wishes?
Yeah, they have members on our
Right,
transportation
okay.
mobility team.
I wonder if that can be made a little more clear.
Yeah, I didn't label it with the department
Yeah, I
name,
understand.
because there's other transportation program services that happen in other departments as well. So I did try to keep it broad enough that apply to many different things.
I mean, I could even see that, I mean, a senior center could have a transportation program come out of that could be something there too. I mean, I'll learn it technically, but,
Yeah,
that broad.
True.
Yeah.
So for a particular service area or group, or another example is we talked about the ADA transition plan.
Mhm.
It's plan and program to some degree. And under this.
So I guess what I'm hearing without further comment is that we like what you've done here. We really don't have any problem with any wording. So thank you. You captured a lot of strange, odd comments from our last one. You put it together in a way that captured everything. I think we're all seeing what we want. It's broad enough to give us some flexibility, but tells where it is. It definitely talks about, not getting into the land development review kind of stuff. So it eliminated a couple items we don't want to mess with, and saying this is where it's going. It gives us that yearly work plan, gives us good flexibility, and I think with what we have here, we can hit everything that we want. So the message, I guess, here is take this, finalize it, bring it back to our next meeting to prepare it to go to council. That where we are?
This is in an AB now, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it's not, yeah, so
So it's already been referred here.
Yeah, the motion in the AB is something along the lines of discuss creation of a transportation advisory board. So I would likely, I forget what Tisha told me she preferred, we may bring it back as a different AB.
Create.
Yeah, just to have it stand on its own. Let me talk to the clerks about their preferences on that again. Just to clarify, I didn't hear modifications.
Right.
So would you like to try to prepare it? Do you want it to come back to this committee, or shall we introduce it at council and then have it come back for, normal path for introduction of an ordinance would be first at council to say, here it is in draft form,
'Cause
then
you're
send
changing
it
the
back
AB.
to the committee for any comment or discussion and another public input opportunity, and then go back onto the regular business agenda for that, whatever future council meeting for action. So that's what I would propose, unless you are feeling like you need a touch with this committee again before we start that referral process.
And then I didn't follow you then, because you're talking about changing the AB number. So you're saying the new one would go to council with referral to us.
Correct.
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
We'd look at it, pretty much, it's gonna be what it is, we're good with it, we'd send it
Yep.
back to council.
Yep.
But I thought, then you said it wouldn't come through us, and then I got confused.
No, what I heard you say before I launched into all of that was go and finalize it and bring it back to us. I just wanted to make sure that bring it back meant via the referral from council.
Right, because I didn't know you were gonna
Thank
change the
you.
AB number. So if you're gonna change the AB number, then yes, do the referral and do that
Okay.
and do the process. We gotta go through the steps, and then we'll have it back after our next meeting to the
Really
council.
good.
A question, would the new AB also tell us something about schedule and something about resourcing?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we'd want to have some discussion on that. I don't know how much I
right.
would
Yeah.
lay out on schedule per se in the AB. We can maybe talk about that tonight too. You can see clerks' preferences for when we onboard new board and commission members. All boards now have this same cycle of May start of a term. So we need to talk about that, given that that's 12 months from now.
Yeah.
So I can lay out a proposal and then you can discuss, debate it. As for resources, yes, that AB will need to be very specific about what resources are necessary in order to implement this. So what I'd ask is allow me to go and talk with our HR department a little bit more and with our staff that works in transportation, get clarity on that. And then as soon as that information is ready and I can create that AB, then I'll put it on the council calendar. I understand there's a desire to get it on as soon as we can, but I need a
That's
little
okay.
bit of time to pull the rest of that together.
And I'm okay, get the time on how much resources you need. That is a critical piece we didn't talk about tonight, realizing that, because it just said we would need resources, but that's the only detail. So that we would need to discuss and see that. So if we don't get it back perfectly, it's okay, I can explain that.
Thank you.
I'd rather have that one right. Okay? Are we good?
+1.
All right. So that leaves us with our major items completed. The last one is the CIP update. Sheldon, for a quick update on that.
Yeah, real briefly, the capital improvement program for the utilities and transportation has currently been at the council workshop for its first viewing and discussion, and then I believe you guys have another council workshop coming up to discuss the capital program, where you're going to be looking at it for prioritization and more conversation about it. One item to note is that the TIP is a subset of the capital improvement program. It's the transportation component within the capital improvement program. So as the council moves forward with adoption of the CIP, they will be adopting the TIP along with that. So that's the update.
Is it a separate table in the CIP document?
It's a separate section. It's the transportation CIP. They're one and the same.
Oh, okay, so the transportation component of the CIP turns into the TIP.
Correct,
Got it.
because the TIP is just a subset of the
Okay.
CIP.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the CIP is ours. We do that for us. The TIP is a requirement of other agencies
Others.
over us, and if we ever want to get anything
It's gotta be on there.
outside funding, we need to have it on the TIP, as Paul mentioned earlier. So the TIP is a requirement we're doing to get other stuff, hopefully.
That's correct.
CIP is our document.
Right, the CIP is your budgeting guidance document that you adopt, and then the TIP is so that we're eligible for outside funding.
And I think we can go back 3, maybe 4 years where we've done the TIP by itself.
Yeah.
So thanks for pointing out that this,
Together.
how it's going to be done a little bit different.
Yeah.
And you have, traditionally, you provided it in a very handy, spreadsheet form with a list. You had a tab for every project. I mean, I don't care the mechanics, but that level of detail is going to be there for all of them. Still the same.
Yeah, still the same.
Okay? And it's nice to do
Absolutely.
that together because they all make sense. And if
Yeah.
something happened strangely in between and we had to update our TIP to meet some other agency requirement, we would do that as needed to meet that requirement to get some funding that came available that we hadn't thought of or something of that nature. We can do that, but that's an aside, right? Sorry, I mentioned that. That's a old agency. That's old agency knowledge. Okay.
Clearly.
So, now our last on our list is project update as always, and that is Sheldon again. And I love, we have a project list that is just there and highlighted items that you have updates to. We're getting good at this. Thank you, Sheldon.
Oh, you're welcome. I do have a couple going.
Yes.
I do have a couple items that I do want to, kind of emphasize a little bit on. The Washtenaw Culvert Project, I'm going to continue to be on this one because they're planning a complete 6-day, 24 hours a day closure of East Lake Sammamish Parkway beginning 8 p.m. on June 13th, Tuesday night, and it will extend until 5 a.m. on Monday, June 19th. We've been meeting with WashDOT. We've met with their contractor, our contractor. We're coordinating very closely, but that is their schedule, and they'll be working towards meeting that schedule. You have a question?
Just for public clarity, where exactly on East Lake Sammamish that will be closed? People can come from what end to what end, and so where exactly would that closure be?
East Lake Sammamish Parkway will be closed between the street of 229th, which is the access to the sand and gravel pit, to the interchange. The interchange will be open, traveling northbound from Front Street. So you can come north, and you can go on any of the ramps, provided you go in the right direction on the ramp, and access I-90 or come off of I-90. But you will only be able to turn south and go south from that interchange or access the interchange from the south.
So if you come, coming from the north, you got to go to
Coming from the
15 or-
north, you're going to either have
15 or
to take Northwest Sammamish Road to go 900, or you're going to have to come Highlands Drive to Sunset Interchange to come in and access I-90.
And Bill, I'll just tell you, we know that this impact is going to be enormous. And none of us are looking forward to this. But WashDOT has a very robust public communication program. We've just started to see pieces of that. We're going to be assisting them with pushing it out into every possible medium we can. We're also communicating with the city of Sammamish because East Lake Sam is a primary way for them to access their community. So you will see a whole bunch more very soon, including detail tour maps and roads
congestion
identified
maps.
as the primary ones that we expect
To see
congestion
That's
on.
first.
And we'll utilize things like, I'm making commitments right here, so.
Go right ahead, I'm making notes.
I'm sure, I'm sure
Make
they're
'em,
already,
make 'em.
I know he's already
Probably already
done
done.
this, our team has already done this, but East Lake Sam and Park in the Highlands both have variable message boards that we utilize for road closures and for emergency events and other things. And I have no doubts that our staff will be posting messages in advance of the closure and during the closure to remind people that things are different for that week.
So not only our VMS boards, but the contractor is required to put about 13 or so out and amongst a lot of places. And when we met with the contractor in WashDOT the other day, we actually added a couple of more VMS signs that they should be putting up as portables at least 1 week in advance and during the closure, so that we're doing our best to keep people informed and at the forefront of their memory of, oh, if I turn here, I get stuck in, really bad traffic versus go to here and just be in bad traffic. So it's going to be a huge impact to traffic circulation here.
Yeah, I think one of the key messages has to be look ahead and plan your week accordingly, right? So if you have the ability to telecommute, maybe consider that one or more of the days, or plan to leave earlier or later than the peak hour commute. There are a variety of ways people will probably have to deal with this closure, but that's going to be the message: is plan ahead, expect it.
And any metro routes being affected by this? I don't think.
Well, they're going to be caught in the congestion.
Right. But none of them actually cross that way.
None of them cross through Front Street, but there are routes on Northwest Sammamish Road. There are routes up on Highlands Drive. Congestion, we'll see it. You'll see some effect even on Sunset Way and on this side of the interstate, because people try and find their way, as well as other people taking 900. People are just going to go every which direction to try and find their way through.
And what about the school district? Are they planning ahead? Do they have their own?
It's July.
I'm sorry?
It's July.
No, it's
No, it's in June.
June.
It's actually the last week of school, and WashDOT's needing to contact them. They probably already have contacted them, but I don't know for sure, but they have to.
We've identified all the stakeholders.
Yeah.
It is a WashDOT project. We're doing our best to try to make sure that we're fully engaged and helping them to be successful in this. And so we've identified those stakeholders. But and wherever we can have conversations, like I've had conversations with City of Sammamish staff to emphasize this. I know Sheldon has as well, and we're doing so with school district. But it's WashDOT that needs to really convey all the particulars of the project.
Any other questions on this one? Except pay attention, spread the word. Thank you. Other ones you want to mention?
Yes. The project for the reconstruction of the Shangri-La Talus Drive intersection with all the utility work and things like that will be advertised for construction bids in June, and they'll be opened up in the latter part of June. So the council can expect to have an agenda bill coming forward for a bid award, probably the first meeting in July. I apologize it wasn't on the list. It was something that I notified of shortly.
It's on the other list.
Let's see. Kurt and I actually met today a little bit more on the IJR. Kurt and I met with WashDOT today to talk about the scope of the IJR so that we have a good solid scope when the consultant is selected. And I'll be participating in the interviews for consultants on June the 15th. And then shortly thereafter, WashDOT will select a consultant, and they expect to have the notice to proceed on the IJR work to be August, September of this year. So just FYI, that's going on. And I'm sorry, I'm using acronyms, and I see the people puzzled about that. The IJR is the Interchange Justification Report for improvements at the Front Street interchange. And it will study not just the Front Street interchange, but all the way to Lakemont Interchange, SR 900 Interchange, and Sunset Way. And there will be some public engagement there for keeping the public informed as to what's happening with that study, as well as council.
Just a comment on the IJR. I think it came up, I'm not sure if Sheldon was here We talked about the regional agenda in the IJR. We talked about it with Bob and Maya.
That's one he missed, yes.
I think one of the concerns I expressed, Kurt was here for sure, was understanding what the IJR's goals are going to be in terms of improvements that increase efficiency to the north of 90 and improvements that increase efficiency to the south of I-90. And in my personal opinion, that means no more cars. If we have 30,000 now and the IGR wants to pump 50,000 onto that road, I have a huge problem with that. And I'm not sure how that fits into scoping conversations or whatever, but how does Issaquah protect our Old Town area and Front Street during this process so that a study doesn't come out and say, yeah, it's no problem, we're going to put 50,000 cars down Front Street?
So we're expecting some engagement with council and the public as we move forward with that project, but I think it's premature for us to say, as the council hasn't given direction yet.
Yeah, we don't even talk about it, actually.
Okay, is that all for
That
tonight?
is,
I had one more thing, Emily, that came up at leadership. We're asking about the scope, to see the scope of the Issaquah Hobart Road.
Yeah, I'm working on getting that
Oh,
to you. I
thanks.
just, I had a couple questions that I had posed to Sheldon and we haven't been able to connect, so.
Okay, thanks.
Possibly tomorrow.
Awesome.
All right, and one last thing I think we forgot was comment back to you back on our Transportation Advisory Board. We didn't give you any feedback on that name.
Oh, sure. Is there any?
Is there any feedback on that name, Transportation Advisory Board?
Why would it not be mobility? Our conversation about transportation programs, I'm looking at it, you even mentioned salmon friendly trips, for example, and that's comprehensive. It's not just about transportation, it's about alternative ways of mobility.
I had it in there at one time, I just shortened it, but I think it's a question perhaps of how deliberately you want to emphasize that as a component, and happy to do whatever you'd prefer.
Yeah, I don't want to get too hung up on it. I view transportation as part of it, of mobility. I mean, but it is somewhat semantics. But that would be my only comment, is instead of using transportation, use mobility. But I'm not going to be, I'm not going to press hard for that. But if others are interested, I am.
Okay.
We have a different comment. I don't like the name and I don't have a suggestion to offer for it, but it just sounds like we're studying. And I don't think that's the point of doing this. So to me, we're missing something here. We're broken, we have lots of problems, and this sounds like we're just gonna talk to folks again. So I think we're forming this because we need to find a new way to do things, and I don't see that in the name. To me, it just sounds like, well, let's send them the mobility master plan and let's send them. Right now, we need to make things work better, and I just don't get any sense of that in the name. But I have no suggestion.
Okay.
That's not great.
My thoughts is actually, I like the name. I like transportation better than mobility. I think mobility doesn't ring with the general public to what it is, and transportation covers, to me, all kinds of mobility. It covers bike, ped programs, whatever. To me, it's movement of people, and I think it's clearer to the public. An advisory board is what they are. So I don't have any other thoughts. I hear what you're saying, Mary Lou, but I don't have any other things to come up with. So
Great.
I'm
So go with it.
I'm okay with it unless you think up something in the next
Yeah,
week, pass it
David.
on. But I think if, with your comments, Paul, I think we'll leave it the way it is unless,
I'm good.
you're good, all right. So, I see someone from the public wanted to have one last comment.
Well, yeah, because we didn't get to comment on the CIP.
Okay, well then, I'm sorry, comment on the CIP.
I was waving my hand.
Sorry, I missed it. It was a 40.
I mentioned this earlier, this is Mary Lynch. In my reviewing of the CIP and the TIP, I did not see Newport Way from S900 to Lakemont, which has been for 30 years in the plan. I did not see that in the plan. And I think we need to make sure it is in there and is funded sooner than later. Because as I talked with Parks, if we're really talking about this being the Mountains to Sound way that if you look at their map, that is, as far as the Mountain Sound Organization concerns, that is a big unsafe gap for them. And they have it on their map, and they've identified it as that, and we're one of the few gaps. So if you really want to, promote mobility, promote biking, promote what you're doing, and connection, regional connection, that should be in there and moved up on the priority list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and I'm sorry I missed you. If that's nothing else, I say we're going to adjourn. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, no count.